Turn then to Governor Luarkie.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Still awake? It's a tough time to be in front of an audience after lunch in the afternoon and last group on the stage here. But thank you for staying with us and allowing us to present to all of you this afternoon. Very interesting discussions, and thank you for all of those that have already presented. I've learned a lot from each of you as I sat here and listened this afternoon. And as I stand here, I also want to acknowledge David Martinez, who is our tribal treasurer, who accompanied me on this trip. He's sitting up there in the corner as well. So, as I stand here and share with you today our experiences, I'm going to touch on two items: on the return of sacred items at an international level, as well as our view as it relates to repatriation of human remains and funerary objects. So I'll share our perspective on that specific to our Pueblo. You hear the young kids talk about things like Facebook and blowing up my phone. That's how we got introduced to international repatriation. We were made aware of this French auction that was going to be coming up. And I kind of got wind of it, and then all of a sudden one day my phone was just bzz, 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 and I have a Facebook account. I'm not normally on it, but, folks were just, Governor, can you, and my phone was just buzzing like crazy. And the challenge that created for us as a Pueblo, it was a very huge educational, cultural challenge, because what I was seeing on Facebook, pictures of items that even some of us that may be initiated into societies don't even see. But here it is, smack dab right on Facebook. It's like, wow. So we had to begin to think about, how do we address this? How do we begin to first of all, calm our community. Secondly, those that are pushing it out on Facebook to stop doing that. And then to be able to figure out, is this something that we respond to? And so, as we sat with our traditional leaders, we took a very different approach. You saw on the internet, you saw on CNN, you saw in the newspapers, this auction and how visible it was being made by, certain maybe collectors or even tribes. For us, our direction was that your goal, your responsibility is to make contact and get those items back. Stay as far under the radar as you can. It's not our place to be going and, making it a very visible thing, because those things should not be put in that light. So we started the process, and one of the challenges for us was the language barrier. We saw that the auction house was very sensitive to wanting to talk with us, because they were getting threats and threats to life, that they were going to get hurt, that somebody was going to go, try to kill them and all these kind of things. And they were coming from tribal people or people representing themselves as relation to tribes. And my first thought was, that's not how we should be conducting ourselves. Tribal or not, to hurt somebody is not right. So we ended up, fortunately, one of our tribal members, his wife studied French and speaks French pretty well. So she helped us. We actually made contact with the auction house, talked to them, told them what our intentions were, and gosh, they were so very willing to help us. And so they helped us set up everything. And so, we just went straight to we just went straight to the auction, and our directive was to acquire the items back, because that was the process that was in place at the time. And we had just a few days to do it. So that's the process we used. And so, you know, we were able to get the items back. It was a decision of our government and our traditional leaders together to go that process. We're at a point, you know, that by going and asking for that help, we're at a point now with that auction house where anytime they have an auction, I get emails. They also send me the catalogs of, you know, all their auctions if there's anything related to Native American issues or Native American items. And I've seen some pretty interesting stuff in there. So they're very, very helpful to us in that regard. The challenges that we ran into were, as we prepared to go to France after the auction happened, we prepared to go to France to go get our sacred item back. Pezzo, I don't know how you would say it, you know, other than item. But as we prepared to go, it was interesting because the Department of Interior here in the United States, they actually drafted a letter for us, or put together a letter for us saying, you know, that there is a government-to-government relationship between tribes and the United States government. We asked at the State Department if they would help us in that same regard so that we could have that level of dialogue with the French government. They were not willing to support that. So it's interesting, so, you know, in the event of, so how do you get that level of acknowledgement and understanding for tribes that have that sovereign self-determination acknowledgement from the federal government at the international level? I think that's going to be one of the next big steps that we're collectively going to have to work on together and be able to get that recognition, including whether it's the State Department or from the President's office, or which venue, which vehicle will allow us to get there. That's going to be a very important piece that we do need to get in place. The other part of this at the international level is being able to, for us as tribes, to figure out how do we not blur those lines ourselves. One of the things I mentioned earlier is the catalogs I get. And you see in these catalogs, there's dowels, the traditional dowels. For some tribes, they see that as art. For us, you know, and I can't speak for, you know, all the pueblos, but I know in the Carib-speaking pueblos in New Mexico and several others there in New Mexico, those dowels are just as sacred. They're not given just for the sake of here's a dowel. But if they're maybe for fertility, if a female is having challenges having children, or does not have any children, to bring the energy of child into home. So those dowels are very, very sacred. So in our world, they're not given just as a piece of art. But you have other tribes that use those as art. So we blur those lines ourselves in some instances. So we're going to need to figure out how do we balance that so that we don't create those contradictions and confrontations for one another. The other piece that I think is very important when we start looking at these items of repatriation, whether they're objects or whether they're human remains, there is a spirituality piece, I believe, that's associated with this. Like I said, we got noticed through Facebook and the technology. We got one of those items back. went to France, brought them home. But after we did that, lo and behold, we became aware of like 7 more. And they're all at least 100 plus years old. So, yeah, and all those, we didn't know they were out there. And all of a sudden, we've been made aware. So that spirituality side, are they now ready to come home themselves? Our humanity says, maybe, I guess we can analyze it however we want. But there's a spirituality side. And the reason I say that as a very critical piece for us to think about is, and those of you that, you know, in your own traditions and cultures, in your prayers, you use the directions a lot. For us, you know, we say, maybe just as an example, north, west, south, east, up above, down below, those every which direction that we don't know your name, wherever it is you stand, those that have passed on, wherever you stand, bless us and protect us, keep us safe. Keep in mind, as natives, we don't have the concept of graveyards. Wherever you rest it, rest happy wherever you're at. So those things become very, very important when we think about these items of repatriation, again, whether it's an object or human remains. We have to be very careful about what we mean when we say, let's bring them home. One of the earlier presentations on Ms. Pipestem talked about, we're not going to just react and say we're going to give something back or we're going to repatriate something. That I think is very, very key and crucial, because as an example for us, Laguna, we have some very sacred items here at Sweetland. They're part of a medicine society that we had, and I've had the opportunity to go see those items. And talking with our traditional leaders, they said, leave them there. It's not even a thought. We're not going to take them home. Reason being, we don't know what's on them. Medicine people take things that are not good, that are not right, so they still just leave them there. We don't want them to come home because we don't know. The challenge that creates is now, who has those things and who's responsible for that? They're here. Things that we talk about when we, the challenge of technology or the opportunity of technology. We're taught with those medicine groups, when they do whatever it is they do, they send that negative sometimes to places that we as humans should not be. As an example, the sky, right? So you see them throw that negative, whatever they take from you, and throw it to the sky. But then as our humanity, we send space shuttles up there, we send satellites up there, and then we bring them back. And they say maybe that negative gets on those things and it comes back. That's why we can't heal, because we keep bringing it back. Same thing with the items that we have, and that's why I think what she said is very key. We have to be careful. And it's not to scare, it's not to create intrigue, it's just what is it that we need to be mindful of. So those are very, very important things, and I think that there are some things that maybe are not meant to go home. They're meant to be where they're at for whatever reason. The other piece that I want to mention is there was a earlier one of the earlier panels that talked about the museums wanting to, or the challenge that maybe museums run into as it relates to returning objects, returning items. We don't want them to deteriorate. We don't want them, we need to preserve them here. We have all the infrastructure to preserve them. Why should we send them back? Well, it reminds me of a story that we're told in our Pueblo, that at one time, the people that we thought we were more powerful, more powerful than the Creator, NMAIA, that we actually even wanted to challenge her, challenge the Creator. And as a result of that, we saw consequence. And earlier, Mr. Martinez and I were talking about that particular panel, and he shared with me the challenge and the part that our humanity overrides is that those processes, that when bones deteriorate, when things go back to earth, that's natural. That's the process. But our humanity is saying, let's interrupt it, let's preserve it, because we have a better space. So we have to find a point, though, where we can find the element and the opportunity for education, but allow the process to complete. Because that's not ours. Just like they tell us, the breath we breathe, the heart in our chest, that's our mother's authority, not mine. That belongs to our mother. So those are things that I think are going to be very, very critical when we think about repatriation. Again, whether it's an object, whether it's human remains. We need to think about it not only in our humanity and all the technology and the great things we have, but the spirituality. What does it mean? Not religion, spirituality. Two different things in my mind. And lastly, technology. I started out telling you about Facebook and my phone blowing up. But in our stories as well, they tell us that one of these days the people are going to be living like ants. If you look down on an anthill, right, they're going all over the place. But they're also going to be, you see them working, you see the lines when they're carrying crumbs into their hole, right? They say the people are going to be like that one of these days, living like ants, just kind of going all over the place. I bet you if you could go a few hundred feet up above the city here and look down, you'll see people everywhere, right? You see the streets maybe, and you'll see the electric lines. And they say that one of these days, the people in this chaos, they're going to lose touch with who they are, their values, their customs, traditions. But somewhere along the way, they're going to finally realize how precious those things are. And the pendulum's going to start back the other way. They also said that during this time, the people their communication's going to minimize with the mouth, but communication's going to be done with electricity. So is that Facebook? And how do we use that to the positive? How do we use that to educate through culture? Not about culture, educate through culture, using technology. Those are things that I would put out for all of us to think about, because I think those can really be great tools for us to use if we can collectively come together and understand how it is we utilize these mechanisms, utilize our teachings, utilize our spirituality and the humanity, so that repatriation and the understanding of one another's ways continue to be respected, continue to be valued, and continue to be perpetuated into the future so that those that are not here yet will be able to see the things that we've seen. So thank you very much.
So, Governor Luarkie, an object has these sort of multiple lives, as it moves from place to place. So you can imagine an object that has, in a spiritual context, some kind of relation to power, that object turning into an object of collection on the part of a collector, and all of a sudden it becomes a different kind of object. Moved into a museum where all of a sudden it's defined as art and has a new meaning, or a different museum where it's defined as an ethnographic kind of object, or into an auction house where it's defined as a commodity. And so one of the questions, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the deliberations and the thought that you were having around this particular question when an object sits within, say, something like the Smithsonian. The claim is one, a kind of moral claim, and the object becomes patrimony as opposed to being a commodity. And sort of navigating and negotiating those two different things feels like kind of a hard problem. And I just wonder if there was some thoughts that you all had about that as you were having that discussion that you'd be willing to share.
Well, I think for our Pueblo, the spirituality side really is that wherever the items are, we're reminded with our cornmeal, you feed every day, you offer your prayers, you offer when you sit down to eat. It's very important to continue to remember that the spirit it's not an object. That's going to always be there. The item itself, maybe its spirit has been released. So that helps, I think, our humanity, our mind, be able to feel a little more at ease in those types of conversations, in those types of a wall of repatriation or a wall of patrimony or, whatever those walls end up being. It helps you to better come to an element of logic and sense of comfort, as opposed to just activists with no logic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's real important to be realistic about those kind of things, and what is it that will allow us to get to that end goal of if the object or remains come home, being respectful to the process and being consistent to the decisions that are made.
Yeah.
So.
Let me try to ask us a different question by drawing a kind of metaphor to American Indian law. So, there was a kind of a moment where I would say a lot of American Indian lawyers, and I'm not one, so I'll happily stand corrected if I'm wrong about this. Felt like there were opportunities in the courts. But I would say, sort of recently, the sense that there are opportunities in the courts has been, somewhat diminished. And there's been, at least in my sense, a kind of growing sense of responsibility to the broader American Indian legal community around what specific cases might go to what specific courts, in the sense that you take a chance on something, you lose, precedent gets set, it has consequences, for other tribes making other kinds of claims. And so the parallel I wonder if we could draw is, the possibility of creating international law around these kinds of things, going after auction houses that would in fact make objects into commodities and put them on the market. If there's some sort of sense that there might be some long-term possibilities here in terms of international law, where an individual tribe, going through the process of kind of a benevolent auction house negotiation, actually has some consequences for the bigger possibilities later. And I'm wondering if that entered into some of the conversations you were having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think after that surfaced, I'm sure other tribes had the same thoughts and conversations as well, but it's at the international level, it's something that not just one or two tribes can do. And that's why I said earlier, collectively, not only the tribes, but
resources and organizations like Smithsonian, we have to have people that understand the international law as it relates to these types of arenas, because I don't think that we'll ever get a law that fits, is a cookie cutter and fits us all. We're going to have to figure out, is it something like a consultation process at the international level, or a collaboration process that's in law. And I'm not a lawyer either, so I'm not sure I'm using the right words, but that would cause and force international, whether it's auction houses or groups or whoever, to work with the United States and the respective tribes on items of repatriation or objects or whatever. So, because the danger is that if we set this particular law, and it works great for this tribe, while it may be totally detrimental to this tribe. So I think it's going to be more important to think about a collaborative process and a collaborative effort that gets enforced in some form or fashion.
Can you say just a little bit more? I mean, I was struck by this sort of sense that, well, you know, on social media, something surfaces, we go through a process with one or a small number of objects, and all of a sudden there are 7. And what does that do in terms of thinking about, I mean, my assumption is, well, this is actually, you know, not that easy to do, and we've done it with 1, and now there's 7 more kind of sitting there confronting us, and we have the burden of knowledge in a way, right?
Right.
So how does that play out?
Well, you know, the interesting thing, and maybe to clarify, that the first one was provided to us or brought to us via social media. The others were brought to us through the museums. So that was really, really interesting. And but I think that as we look at social media and its impact on society today, as I said, you know, we're communicating with electricity now, and how do we use that electricity, that form of communication, as a form of education, but also as a form of protection to, I guess, for lack of a better word, that innocence. Because in our tribe, our Pueblo, like I said earlier, some of those items, even those of us that may be initiated into certain societies, don't even see some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So how do you protect that innocence via technology?
It's very much like, you know, the case that you described.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So simple.
I thought I was also struck by this sort of sense that the auction house started getting threats, you know, serious threats from, you know, kind of tribal people or people who wanted to speak for. I mean, it also speaks to the other side of social media and the internet, and I'm wondering if there was other sort of conversations around that or other things that appeared, you know, there. I mean, it's just, as you say, it doesn't seem like the very first thing that would happen is that, you know, somebody from Laguna is going to send a death threat to a French auction house, right?
Fortunately, none of those threats were from Laguna, at least as far as I know. So, but, you know, our approach is, you know, has never been to be reactive. You know, we're reminded, you know, you know, be proper, and be diligent in the decisions that you make and the approaches that you take. When we actually went to France, the guy, I mean, he had a whole box full of letters, you know, and he showed us a couple, and they weren't very pleasant letters, you know. And I think, you know, for us as tribal people, we need to make sure that we're not contradictory to the things that we're trying to represent and the things that we desire. I mean, it's kind of like, if you recall, a couple years back, might be a little longer now, but you saw in the national news these opposition to the abortion houses, right, or abortion clinics. And the guy that was most in opposition to abortion clinics, you know, he goes and shoots the doctor, you know, and he's pro-life.
Yeah.
You know, it made no sense.
Yeah.
So it's kind of those kind of things that we want to make sure that we don't find ourselves in those kind of contradictions, you know, and being able to continue to perpetuate the goodness of the objects, the items, because those sacred items were all created for good intention, and those intentions don't change. You know, we're the ones that maybe try to change it, our humanity.
Yeah. I mean, it ends up being this odd and contradictory and complicated situation, right, where a French auction house is motivated by threats which are unwelcome alliances, right? I mean, unwelcome contributions, really, in some way.